Are you worried that you might have to spend too much money in retirement? Or instead, you might be concerned that you're not spending enough. You're not enjoying the retirement that you deserve. Well, stay tuned to this week's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome to Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton. Here's my good friend and co-host, Sarah Samuels. And today, we are talking about how much you can and cannot spend in retirement. Why is this such an important topic? Well, really simple. You know, some people spend too much and they're at risk of running out of money and they don't even know it. Others are so accustomed to saving and being frivolous throughout their working years that they're not willing to spend and enjoy retirement. Almost as if, Sarah, they think they can take it with them. I don't think that's true, is it?
I think a lot of people subscribe to that idea that he or she who dies with the most money sometimes wins the game of life, you know. But Dave, of course, it's great to be here with you and with all of our listeners here listening to the Retirement Income Source. And today's show, it's a really interesting topic because we're going to cover a little bit of the psychology behind those people that worry. You know, some people, and I know you'll probably tell us a couple stories later about clients that you've worked with in the past, but some people really are worried. They have millions of dollars, maybe even tens of millions of dollars in the bank, yet they worry that they haven't saved enough. Other people just spend like there's no tomorrow, essentially. And so really, we want to talk to both of those people and, of course, all of those people that are somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and sometimes the people that spend too much, it's because their financial advisors enable them. Right. And just they're yes advisors, right? You've heard of like yesmen before,
yes,
right?
Well, absolutely.
There's yes advisors, like sure, you've got $1 million, you could take $150,000 a year, no problem, you know. And unfortunately, the client thinks it's okay because their advisor said it's okay. But you know, you mentioned me telling stories, so I think I'll start off with one. Retirement is a scary thing. Why? Because your entire life you've saved and invested and you've spent money out of your paycheck, right? So you're not used to actually taking money out of your investments. I remember a story, a guy named Ed, who was a top executive at a company in Hartford. He was a client of mine, became a client in the late 80s. So this is Dave as a young financial advisor. Wasn't anywhere near.
This is hotshot Dave, right?
Nowhere near retirement.
Driving the sports car, wearing the fancy suits.
The just about 60-year-old Dave today, right?
Yes.
This is the young Dave who had this guy who had $6 million. And back then he was earning 6% tax-free municipal bonds. So you could do the math. That's $360,000, right? Right. He needed $150,000 a year. And he was so afraid of retirement that he begged me 6 different ways to help him, to prove to him he's never going to run out of money in retirement. And I had to sit and say, Ed, you're a smart man. What is wrong? $150 a year. You know, you could literally take it out of principal, have it under your mattress, and live 40 years, and you're going to be okay with $6 million. What's going on?
Yeah, every scenario.
And that's when he educated me. He sat me down and said, you know, you're young, and what you don't realize is I spent my entire year getting a paycheck, paying myself first, as you financial advisors tell, right? Putting money away, investing, spending the rest, and so on. And now it's a huge paradigm shift. I'm no longer get that paycheck. Now I'm taking money out of these investments that I was told by you financial advisors, don't ever take it out, just put it in, right? Yep. He says, so please humor me. And that was a great lesson for the young financial advisor named Dave Scranton.
Yeah. Well, Ed certainly came to the right advisor since math is your specialty. So I'm sure you're able to use logic and equations to put his mind at ease. So
what he taught me was it wasn't only a mathematical thing. It's highly an emotional thing.
Absolutely.
Right?
You got to think with both parts of the brain. Right. Let's get to our Ask Dave question. Maybe you can put Jill's mind at ease. Jill is sending us an email from Alabama. She says, I'm worried I haven't saved enough to retire when I want to retire. What should I do?
All right, Jill. So now I'm sitting here wondering if you are like a female version of my good friend Ed, who has saved so much, but just has this internal paranoia about that. And Jill, I will tell you, women tend to be more conservative when it comes to money, as I'm sure you're aware, and tend to worry about that more. Men tend to be a little bit more flippant about it. Oh, I've got enough. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine, right? The world is falling around you, and everything's going to be fine.
Right. Yep.
Women tend to be a little bit more like, gee, I'm concerned about running out, even if you have as much or more as Ed had, right? So I'm trying to figure out whether you're in that category or you're in the category of someone who realistically hasn't saved enough. So let me pretend you're in the second category for now, Jill. And if not, then just stay tuned to the rest of the show, and we'll get to your concerns. But if you're correct in saying you haven't saved enough, then here's the reality. You're smart to be worried about it. The real concern is for those people who say, gosh, I haven't saved enough, or they don't know they haven't saved enough, and they're going to retire anyway, and they're going to spend, and they're not going to worry about it, right? Everyone in my family died in their 70s, so I'm not worried about it, right? And of course, Murphy's Law means you could be the one person that lives well into your 90s and has to worry about it. So you're smart to be concerned. And remember, we always talk in the show about how if you're invested for income, you could take 4 or 5% a year out of your investment. So you figure out, okay, how much you have saved, right? If you invested for income, just figure out what 4 or 5% a year of that is. That can come out as income. Add Social Security to that. Add your pension to that. If you happen to be one of the lucky ones that still has one of those old-fashioned type pensions that pay you a monthly income forever. And then you have to answer, can I live on that? And if you can't, then, well, it doesn't matter. That's still all you could take. So now you have two choices, right? You can work part-time to supplement it as long as you can, or you can work full-time and not take income and just, retire a little bit later. Okay, but Jill, good for you if you have that concern. But hopefully what I just share with you helps in you better to determining whether your reaction is more emotional or whether it really is a concern that, hey, maybe you haven't saved enough. Jill, thank you.
Yep. And Jill, thank you again for sending in your Ask Dave question. And if any of our listeners have a question that you would like to send into the show and potentially hear it on a future episode, all you have to do is send us an email to askdave@retirementincomesource. That's SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today we're talking about if you haven't saved enough, if you need too much in income versus those people that maybe are not taking enough in income to really enjoy themselves in retirement. So Dave, you just answered a great question from Jill, who's really worried she hasn't saved enough. We hope Jill is in the first camp, or maybe she just is psychologically concerned, but in actuality, she has saved enough, versus someone who actually hasn't saved enough. And you gave some pretty good ideas, some tips for those that really haven't saved enough. Like they really, they might need to continue to work part-time or even work full-time. Do you have any other advice for those, maybe some catch-up, some things that they could do?
Well, sure. And for Jill, though, it's a good, healthy fear, right?
Yeah.
We just went through this, hurricane last week, right here in Florida. And, it's on one hand, the media blows it out of proportion, right? So we're on the East Coast here. For those of you who don't know, it was more of a West Coast event. So we're sitting here and, everybody's afraid to stay. I mean, one day during the week I came in, the parking lot was empty, all the businesses in the building, and nothing was happening, right? But the media makes it crazy. But nonetheless, it's a healthy fear, right? Yeah. There's certain things you have to have a healthy fear of, right? And one is, if you're in a boat, you have to have a healthy fear of the water, right? Because the water can kill. It can get rough quickly. Bad things can happen. You have to have a healthy fear of a hurricane. What if it took a hard right turn and came running over us, right? That could happen. And you also have to have a healthy fear about running out of money. And I think, in retirement, because the reason is people are living longer and longer, Sarah. And as a result, there's a greater chance that people are going to run out of money. And even if they don't, inflation has a much bigger impact over a 30-year period than a 15-year period, right?
Yeah, inflation is a huge killer in retirement.
And the longer you live in retirement, the more you have to be concerned about, right? Gosh, what if I take sick? What if I need to go on convalescent home? What if I need full-time home health care? All right. So it's good to have a healthy fear. So Jill, good for you for having that healthy fear. But, there's a scarier person. And before we talk about the one that's saved enough, Sarah, next I want to talk about those that haven't saved enough but don't know it and are on a collision course. How to determine if you're on a collision course because you're taking more income than you safely can. Coming up right here, I'm David Scranton along with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and most Americans are concerned that they haven't saved enough for retirement. So we're talking to those really that are realistically worried they haven't saved enough, and those maybe that don't know it, that maybe are not even aware that they haven't saved enough, that they're not taking income the right way. And Dave, I just have to say, I don't think you're running for president, but have you put in your bid to be a local politician? Maybe
okay.
mayor.
I know there's like a joke coming here somewhere. What's the punchline?
The reason is because I feel like just a few minutes ago, you really skirted my question when I asked you, hey, do you have some tips for those that maybe haven't saved enough or ways that they can catch up if they need to for retirement?
Okay, Miss Smarty Pants. Well, I guess I can answer that question if you
Perfect.
insist.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, yes. Because I know our listeners are probably, there's some in that camp that are worried. You know, they want those catch-up tips.
No, it's true. And so there's a few things. I mean, one thing is, you want to be debt-free in retirement. When I say debt-free, even if you could be mortgage-free, right? So if you can put together a plan to pay down extra money to be mortgage-free in retirement, that's excellent, right? Because it's not just offense, but it's defense. It's not just how much income you're bringing in, but also how much is going out. So the fewer fixed expenses you have, the better. So that's part of it. The next part of it is trying to put away more money and put yourself in the right position. So you have in your 401k, for example, if you're not maxing it out, you should. If you're over the age of 50, there's things you can actually put more money away, right? Catch up in even IRA or Roth IRA contributions. And what if you can't afford to max it out? Well, do everything you can to do so. What if you have some money in non-IRA accounts? Okay, well, if you have some money in non-IRA accounts, maybe you can start to spend some of that to pay your bills so that you could put more money in pre-tax accounts. Why is that a big deal? Because in the pre-tax account, you might be putting 60 or 70 cents on a dollar in the plan, but a whole dollar is going in the plan because it's pre-tax. So think about it. You take 60 cents, 70 cents out of your after-tax account to pay your bills, but a whole dollar goes into your pre-tax account for retirement. That gives you some leverage to help you catch up. So do everything you can to max these things out, and also do everything you can to become debt-free in retirement. Absolutely. And Sarah, some of our listeners might remember a story about Iraj, right? Years ago, I had this client that, he's from, I can't remember, he's from Iran or Iraq. This goes back to the 80s, just like Ed. And he told me he had no debt, right? So we're going through his budget. And then he said, well, my car payment is X amount per month. And I looked at him and said, well, wait a minute. He said he had no debt. And he goes, well, I don't. But I make a car payment into a investment account in advance so that every 5 years I can pay for a new car in cash. He says, and I figured out, instead of spending $450 a month, which it was back then, on a loan in arrears, I could save $300 a month in advance and pay cash for the car. Yeah. And if I'm going to have a car payment forever, well, why don't I just get in the habit of saving in advance for the next one? Yeah. And I thought that was a good thing to do, and that's frankly what retirees should be doing. They should not have car payments. They should not have car leases. They should not have debt. And in an ideal world, not even mortgage debt.
And that's really a good example of what investing for income can really look like with your friend Raj, and we've talked about, those that Jill, we had an Ask Dave question a few minutes ago from Jill, who was worried that she hadn't saved enough. But there are a lot of people out there, Dave, that are blissfully unaware of the fact that they haven't saved enough, or they're unaware of the way that they're getting income from their advisors, maybe from their investments, is not the right way to generate income. And we have an Ask Dave question that has to do with this. We have a question from Peter in Arizona. He says, Dave, I go to my advisor and I tell him I need more income, and he just says, okay, that's fine. He sends me a check in the mail. So how do I know if he's just a yes advisor, like you say?
Peter, that's a great question, and it's I'll give you a couple of answers there. And unfortunately, a lot of advisors do that because they want to keep their clients happy, right? They don't want to lose clients, and unfortunately, a lot of people are just uninformed as investors. So they may say, no, you can't take that much income. And then you get upset and say, well, wait a minute, this is my money. You can't tell me I can't take it. And they go to another advisor who's a better salesman who says, well, yeah, sure, whatever. And then you switch accounts, right? So some advisors turn into yesmen, because they don't want to say no. It's not that they want to harm you. They just don't want to say no. So how can you tell? Well, the first thumbnail sketch is how much income you're taking on a regular basis in from how much money. So if you add up all your accounts, and by the way, it's not per account, right? You might have $500,000 with your advisor. You might have $500,000 somewhere else, but you might be taking $40,000 of income from one advisor's account. Well, yeah, if all you had was that $500,000 for that one account, that would be too much. But when you have $1 million total, that $40,000 is 4%. That may not be, because the general rule is about 4% is what you should take. You could squeeze it to 5 if you're investing for income, like we always talk about investing for the I first, G second, income first, growth second, right? But it's based upon your total liquid assets. But let's get more granular. It also comes down to how much interest and dividends your account is generating. So you need to go to usually the right-hand column on the statement that says income, figure out the dollar amount of the income annually, subtract the investment management fee from that, and figure out whether you're taking more or less. If you're taking any more than that number, then you're in risk of running out of money. So again, it's taking the income. And by the way, what if you don't have that right-hand column, right? A lot of statements don't have an income column because their advisors aren't income advisors. Well, then you have to dig deeper. And you're probably not getting enough income if they're not income advisors. Then you have to dig deeper, right? And you have to figure out, okay, how much interest and dividends is really being generated? And yes, why do you have to subtract the management fee? Well, because that management fee comes out of that interest and dividends. You get what's left over. Figure out what that net number is per year. And again, if you're taking a dime more than that, yes, you are taking the chance of running out of money.
Peter, thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave question. And if any of our listeners or even our YouTube viewers have a question that you would like Dave to answer potentially on a future episode of the show, all you have to do is send us an email. Send it to askdave@retirementincomesource.com. You're listening to The Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And if you're like most people, you might be worried that you haven't saved enough for retirement. You might be looking for some tips and some catch-up contributions, or maybe some ways to even tell if you have saved enough, or even if you're working with the right financial advisor as you transition into retirement. And Dave, you just brought up some great points about ways that our listeners can actually look at their statements and try to figure out if they're really working with an income specialist or potentially an advisor that's maybe geared only towards growth, or even just a yes advisor.
Mm-hmm. And you know, it isn't just people who haven't saved enough for retirement, right? It's for people who have saved enough. But there's some people that, okay, you may have saved $2 million. Okay, if you have $2 million, can you live off 80 or 100,000 plus maybe a couple of Social Security benefits if you're married? Probably, if you saved $1 million or $2 million, you probably should be able to have 150,000 of income. And I don't think any of our listeners think they're going to be, in the poorhouse with 150,000 of income. You're going to be okay. But there are some people that are higher income that maybe those people earned $300-400 when they're working, and maybe they spent 80% of that. Because even if they save 20% of $300,000 or $400,000, they'd accumulate a couple $1 million pretty quickly, right? So maybe they're used to spending $300,000 of the $400,000, and now cutting back to $150 just doesn't sound right. And they think they're okay, but they're not. But they have saved enough, by most people's standards.
Right. That's true. Well, it's a different gauge for every person. And I think that's why it's so important to, again, work with an income specialist that can help you determine from what you saved and what your needs are when you retire. And of course, taking away those things that will go away in retirement. So then you really know, okay, exactly how much you need. And like you said, Dave, if you're investing for income the right way, you can expect maybe 4 to 5% from your investments. And then you can, most people, that's going to work for them. Of course, if they've made that transition, though, that income first, growth second investing.
It's so true, but you've got to think about all the income that's being taken. Sometimes people just think, well, this is the monthly income I'm withdrawing. But then I find that a lot of people once a year, once every other year, go back to the well, right, for more. So let's say somebody is taking the income they need on a normal basis, but then once a year, twice a year goes back to pay their property tax. Well, that's got to get factored in the income. Or they've got a lot of deferred maintenance on their house. Like I have, right? That we're finally doing now. And, this year they have to take out a chunk for the roof. They know 2 years from now they have to take out a chunk for the windows and the furnace and the driveway. Well, that's got to be factored in too, right? So it's not just the monthly amount that people take that they are calling their, quote, income. It's also when they go back to the well, right? So if you're taking less income than the maximum, you're still reinvesting some interest and dividends, well, then you can go back to the well, right?
Right, absolutely.
But if you're
yeah.
maxing out those interest and dividends in terms of withdrawals, well, then no, you really can't.
Yeah. Well, what about those people, Dave, on the other side of the coin, right? Maybe those of our listeners that are really not taking enough to really enjoy themselves in retirement. Maybe they haven't made that income first, growth second transition. Maybe they don't understand how to really do income investing the right way. So we're going to talk about ways that you can determine if you're one of those people, maybe you're not taking enough, and ways that you can truly maximize your enjoyment in retirement. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we are talking about income in retirement. And Dave, it really seems like it breaks down into a couple main categories here. We're talking about those that maybe haven't saved enough to retire. They categorically don't have enough money in savings. But even from there, it breaks down even further into those that maybe don't know they haven't saved enough and are being frivolous, versus those like Jill, who was sending an Ask Dave question, who know they haven't saved enough, but they have that healthy fear of it, and they're concerned, But in addition to that category of those who haven't saved enough, we have those that really have saved enough, but they're maybe spending too much. They're spending too much in retirement, and maybe they haven't transitioned to the income first, growth second investing. So they're spending down their principal as opposed to taking income the right way, and that's another huge problem.
Yeah, and I would take Jill out of it only because, assuming we I could take her at face value with her question that, hey, I don't have, we haven't saved enough. That's my concern, and that's a real concern, right? Well, now you can deal with it. Now you can say, like I told Jill, you could retire and do some part-time work to supplement your income, or you can postpone retirement so you could save for longer and let your money grow and not draw off it, and then get into retirement later. You have choices, but for the others, both whether you've not saved enough or whether you've saved enough, but you're taking money out of principal, you run a collision course. Think about a 30-year mortgage, right? 30-year mortgage, you're paying almost all interest at the beginning, right? You're paying a tiny little bit of principal, but somehow that mortgage gets paid within 30 years. So you have to think about that in reverse, right? Today, if people retire in their 60s, they pretty much have to plan for a 30-year retirement because it could happen, right?
Right. Yeah. More and more people are living past 30 years or more in retirement.
So think about the same math that allows a 30-year mortgage to be miraculously paid off when you start by paying just a tiny bit of principal. It's the same math that says if you take a little bit of principal, a tiny bit of principal early on in retirement, but you live 30 years, guess what? You're going to run out of money.
Right.
Right. And if you take even a little more than that wee bit, well, then you can run out of money in 15 or 20. And that's a real issue. And that's assuming you're sitting in an interest-bearing account, like a mortgage is fixed interest, right? You're sitting in a fixed interest-bearing account. But for most people, they have their money in mutual funds and in the market. What does that mean? That means you could be taking a tiny bit out, thinking, okay, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be able to live, into retirement and make it into my 90s, and I'm not worried after that. Okay, maybe I guess you could take that educated guess, but you're not sitting in a fixed interest-bearing thing. You're in the market. Now the market takes a major drop and stays down for a while. You're selling way more shares than you ever thought you were, and now you deplete the money in 15 years instead of 30, right? So those are situations that I really want to warn our listeners about, Sarah, is where you're taking a dime more than you can get in interest and dividends. That, to me, that's, the real scary point for anyone listening to this show today.
Yeah. Dave, what about those maybe that are out there that are listening and they say, Dave, I hear you, I think, I have enough money, but I just don't want to let it go, because we have this question that came in from Debbie out in Georgia. She says, we've done a good job of saving and investing. I feel that we have a healthy amount saved for retirement, but my husband is not interested in spending any of it. It's almost like he wants to take it with him to the grave. How can I help change his mind?
Right, just put a trailer hitch on the back of the hearse, right,
Debbie?
Exactly,
right.
Yeah, we'll bring the money with you, no big deal. Yeah, well, you're right, Debbie. It doesn't work that way. Now, some people have as a major goal, hey, my number one goal is to leave a giant legacy. Okay, if that's your number one goal, but I don't know about him, but it sounds like that's not your goal. I think what would best help your husband is to understand that he doesn't have to take it out of principle. See, what's probably fueling this, I would think, is that he's worked so hard to save money over the course of his life and be thrifty. that thriftiness gets in your blood. It's what you're used to, right? And after saving and being told, by financial advisors, like my client Ed told me, 35 years ago now, that, hey, we're told by financial advisors, put it in, don't ever take it out, right? Well, now you get to retirement, and that's ingrained in your inner being. And you think it's irresponsible for me to be withdrawing money when I scrimped and saved to save it, right? Well, that's because I believe, Deb, that he's in the mindset of saying you have to withdraw money, but you don't. See, if you have an income first, growth second approach, invest for interest and dividends, you're still going to get some growth, but interest and dividends first. And you're only spending the interest and dividends, then you're not taking a dime out of principal. And I think if he knew that he weren't taking a dime out of principal, he's just living off those interest and dividends, then he could take it with a clear conscience, because it's like a renewable resource, like renewable energy. Next year, there'll be more interest and dividends. The year after, there'll be even more. You can spend it all with a clear conscience, just like when he was working, right? He'd save pay himself first, like Ed, save money, and then spend the rest with a clear conscience. Why? Because that paycheck was a renewable resource. Well, the same is true if you invest with an income first, growth second approach. So, Deb, hopefully that can help fix his mindset.
Yep. And Debbie, thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave question. And if any of our listeners or even our YouTube viewers have a question about retirement or finances or anything that you would like to submit to the show, you can always send us an email to askdave@retirementincomesource.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we are talking about all of the different ways of taking income in retirement, from those that maybe haven't saved enough, they don't know it yet, versus those with a healthy fear of it, and even those that have saved enough, but they're still spending too much. Or maybe like Debbie and her husband, who's really worried. He wants to maybe take the money with him. And Dave, you brought up a great point about maybe Debbie's husband is concerned about taking that money out of principal. And it's hard when your whole life you've been putting that money in the piggy bank. Right now, if you're withdrawing, if you're using that strategy, you're taking the money out of the piggy bank, and that's difficult. But when you transition to that income first, growth second investing, it really gives you permission to spend the money, almost like your friend Raj, who was doing a little income investing essentially to pay his car note each month. So he never had to worry about his car note coming out of his principal.
Yeah, it's funny because you remember the story of a prospective client of one of our advisors in another part of the country I was visiting. So I sat in on this meeting, and this particular guy's name was Sammy, and he was he liked cars. He somehow came up in conversation. I don't know. So I asked him about his car collection. Yeah. And his response was, I don't have a collection. Now, he had several $1 million. He could easily afford to do something. And he liked muscle cars, right? And this is a few years ago when, a American muscle car from the 70s, maybe late 60s in good shape was probably $50,000, $60,000. Right now, they're a little more. He could easily afford it. And I said to him, well, Sammy, guess what? You go home and say to your wife, honey, I'm going to take $50,000, $60,000 out of our hard-earned savings and buy a 50-year-old car. How's that conversation go over?
Probably not well.
That's right. He laughed. He said, it's
not going to happen.
Right, terrible. And I said, now imagine instead that you go back and say, hey, sweetheart, look, I'm going to take just 4 or 5 months worth of interest off our investments, not principal, just interest. And I'm going to buy this car that, hey, might be able to be passed on to our kids someday. And after I get done with that, I want to take the next 4 or 5 months interest and do some of the projects around the house that you've been asking me to do.
That's a winner. That deal might work.
That's a winner. A big smile on his face, right? Because what I did was I liberated him to spend his money. It's almost like a permission slip, right? When our listeners had young children, if they were sick, couldn't go to school or couldn't go to gym class, they had to write a permission slip, right? Well, this is like a permission slip from your kids to say, look, assuming you want to leave a legacy, to say, look, you can spend this money because you're not touching principal. Okay, it should be a permission slip from a good financial advisor, not the yes advisors. Permission slip from a good financial advisor to say, hey, you're earning enough in interest and dividends, take it out of that renewable resource, right? So I think that's what's important. Is I think our listeners need to know that, hey, you can enjoy your retirement. You can liberate yourself, free yourself to enjoy it if you're taking it from that renewable resource.
Yep. I think that's one of the most important things. And I know you know this obviously from experience with clients, but once people understand this mechanism that they're not taking money out of the piggy bank, that they're really using that money, investing that money in assets to generate the interest and dividends, to generate that income. And that's what they can potentially tap into. So that money in the piggy bank is never touched. I think that idea really resonates with people. And once they get it, it's almost like a paycheck from their job. And they're used to that concept, earning a paycheck every couple of weeks or,
Very much so. And people don't think about, okay, well, I'm going to save less this year out of my paycheck so I can make this big expenditure, right? Because this renewable resource is going to come in next year. But all of a sudden, when it comes to, retirement, it's, well, wait a minute,
Yeah.
So it's really no different. Great analogy.
Right. Absolutely. Well, if you want to learn some ways maybe that you can take advantage, maybe you're one of those people that's not taking enough income and you want to learn some ways that you can take more, stay tuned. We're going to cover some of those tips coming up. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to The Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and today we're talking about how you can tell whether you're needing to spend too much in retirement, maybe more than you safely can, or whether you're just not comfortable spending enough. And yes, you can liberate yourself to spend more with a clear conscience. And both those things are important issues. We talked about how some people just spend too much, whether they've saved enough or not, because they just don't know, and they're on that slippery slope into retirement. How can you tell? Well, simple. Sarah, like we talked about before, just, hey, how much interest and dividends is your account generating? Not growth, not total return, the interest and dividends, the income component. Get it off the right-hand column in your statement. If it's not on the right-hand column of your statement, then find out otherwise. So you can forensically get it from the statement in other places, talk to your advisor, get a report. How much interest and dividends you're getting. Subtract the fees, and that's how much income you can safely take from a portfolio. Yeah. No more. A dime more means you're taking principal. And Sarah, like I did that 30-year mortgage analogy, a dime out of principal means if you live in your 90s, you could run out.
Yep. But what about those, Dave, that really theoretically, you look at their portfolio, they have saved enough for retirement, but they don't want to spend it. They're scared to spend it. A lot of those people, the reason why is because they're thinking of it as taking money out of the piggy bank, using the withdrawal strategy. They're taking away from the principal. And it's hard to reverse that mindset when you've spent your whole life putting money into the bank. But when you transition to an income first and grow second investing, and you transition to using income investments, it really gives you that permission slip to be able to enjoy the money that you're spending.
Like you said right before the break, people sometimes can spend money more liberally when they're taking out of the paycheck because they know there's going to be another paycheck next month, right? But
ideally, right? As long as you don't get fired.
That's right. That's right. But if you have your investments, it's different. They think of it as a finite resource.
Right.
They think of it as, I've got a well. Am I going to run out of water? I've got an oil tank to heat my house. Am I going to run out of oil? Versus looking at it as a spring where the water runs eternal, or looking at it as, the ability to use wind or solar to fuel your home. It's a whole, think about how liberally you'd use your energy if you knew it was a renewable resource and it's coming in next year, right? It would be a different story. Right. How liberally you might use your water, where as if you have a well, you're going to be shutting the faucet off, turning it on, shutting it off. But if you knew it was eternal, well, you're gonna let the water run more often, and it's okay.
Yeah, and just like with using solar power, Dave, if you're generating too much electricity, you don't even need that electricity. You can feed it right back into the grid and get paid from the electricity provider. Just like you can reinvest your interest and dividends in your portfolio and even organically grow that your nest egg.
It's like people do when they're working, right? They might be on a savings plan, but if they're saving short term for a big goal, they might reduce their long term saving for a couple years and then kick it back up again, because that renewable income called a paycheck has another use short term, right? And when you have that renewable income through a paycheck called interest and dividends, as you indicated, it's the same thing. Yeah. It's your choice every year, and if you decide certain years you don't want to spend it, you want to reinvest it, Now you're building a nice inflation hedge. You're growing your money the old-fashioned way through interest and dividends.
Absolutely. And despite it being a renewable resource, some people are still concerned, how can I afford it? What can I do to make sure I can? Just like our next Ask Dave question, which comes from Daniel in Vermont. He says, Dave, my wife really wants to have another home in a warmer climate as the winters are brutal in Vermont. So how do I know if I can really afford this?
Well, do you say Dan? I'm sorry.
Daniel.
Daniel. Okay. Well, Daniel, your wife is a smart lady because you're right. The winters are brutal up there in Vermont. So how can you tell if you can afford it? Well, okay. Let me answer it two ways. Number one, if you have non-IRA money, we call it non-qualified money in the financial world, but that means non-IRA, non-401k, non-403b. It's money you've already paid taxes on and then invested. If you have enough money to pay cash on that home, and by the way, Daniel, I'm assuming that you want to keep your house in Vermont, right? I'm assuming you're not selling one and buying another. That's easier. So if you have this non-IRA money, it's money that's already been taxed, then you can, if you could take some of that money, you have enough to pay cash, then the math is simple. You say, okay, let me take the rest of my assets and let me figure out if I can get a 4 or 5% income stream. Can I now live and support two homes off that 4 or 5% income stream, that interest or dividend, when I add to it my Social Security and any pensions I might have, if you're fortunate enough to have one of those old-fashioned pensions. So again, take it out of the already taxed money, and then with the rest, can I earn enough in interest and dividends after fees to support both homes and live the lifestyle I want when you factor in other benefits like Social Security? If the answer is yes, you're good to go. But what if you say, well, no, Dave, I'm all lopsided toward IRAs, 401ks. I don't have a lot of after-tax money. Well, now it's a different math. Now you have to figure out how much income you can generate from those investments, add your Social Security and pension. So it's the same, but now you've got to say, all right, can I live the lifestyle I want and pay a mortgage on this property in a warmer climate? And if the answer is yes, I can support that mortgage on the property as well as other lifestyle goals, well, then you're good to go. And why is that such a big deal? Because you don't want to pay, if you want to buy a house for $300,000, the last thing you want to do is take $300,000 out of an IRA and pay tax on it. Heck, you only have about $180 left, right? So if that's the case, then are you earning enough interest or dividends to live the lifestyle you want and pay the mortgage on that second property? So Daniel, I hope that helps answer your question.
And thank you for sending in your Ask Dave email. And if any of our listeners want to send in a message or an email and maybe hear your question answered on a future show, all you have to do is send us a message to askdave@retirementincomesource.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today we've been talking about the different methods and ways of taking income in retirement from those that are worried that they're going to need too much income in retirement, from those who really aren't taking enough income. They're not taking advantage of income first, growth second, investment mechanisms to really generate that income to give themselves that permission slip to enjoy retirement.
And that's a common thing. It's common, as you know. I mean, we'll see clients from other firms. They've been long retired, and they might be earning a 2% dividend and paying a 1% fee. So if that's the case, they're getting 1%, their advisor's getting 1%, which that alone sounds kind of perverse, right? That your advisor's getting
splitting it half, basically.
That's right. Your advisor's getting as much income off the portfolio as you are, because at that point it's not about total return, right? In your accumulation years, fees don't matter as much, because you say, all right, well, here, if I'm averaging an 8 or 10% return and they're taking 1, is it that big of a deal?
Right, not a big deal for
but
that kind of return.
But if you're getting a 2% income stream and they're taking 1, that's half your income. That's a big deal.
That's a huge issue, absolutely.
And I love Daniel, what he said, because a lot of people want to do that. I mean, my practice, as you know, is in Connecticut, and we're still thriving practice. I want to say we have 11 financial advisors now in Connecticut. And the reality is that, we hear that a lot. People want to come and have a house somewhere warmer, right? Now, if you're down here, live here, a lot of people go, well, I want a house up in the mountains. I want a house somewhere colder,
somewhere different.
Right? But it's a good goal. But you don't necessarily have to buy. See, if Daniel wants to spend 6 months plus down here, more time, and just be up there in the summer, well, then purchasing is a great deal. So I answered Daniel's question based on his wife's goal, which is to purchase a home, right? Yeah. But let's say a lot of people say, well, okay, I'm going to stay up here through the holidays because my family's here and the kids and grandkids, and right after January 1st, I'm hightailing it to Florida. And a lot of people say they want to come down January, February, March, and then maybe go back up for, the April holidays, right? And that might be okay too, in which case you don't want to buy, you just want to rent. You're renting for 3 months. It makes more sense.
Yep. Or potentially buy a condo, something that's going to be maybe even, that lower maintenance, potentially lower cost. You don't have to worry about a yard. You have someone else that are taking care of, some of the other expenses.
If you 3-4 months here, maybe you buy a condo. That's right.
Or rent one, yeah.
Or what if you want to be here 8 or 9 months and you only want to be up in Vermont, July, August, foliage in September, and then you're hightailing it out. Well, then maybe you sell your home in Vermont or the colder climate. Maybe you buy a condo up there and you buy a nicer house down here, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, it's not like a switch, you flip it, it's yes or no. It's more like a rheostat. There's all different levels of achieving those goals.
Right. And that's why we say, too, investing for income, it's not flipping a switch. It's really that transitional period, maybe 5 to 10 years before you retire, where you start investing for income in different ways based off your needs, taking the income if you're not working, but if you're still working, reinvesting that income, to build up your portfolio.
Most investments have both a growth and income component. And in people's younger years or accumulation years, they may not know it, but they're investing for a growth first, income second approach. They just don't know it because they don't pay attention to the income. Growth first, income second. Well, the reality of it is all they're doing is flipping that and starting to go more even income and growth 10 years before retirement, and maybe within 3 to 5 years before retirement, it's full on income first, growth second. So they're just flipping their priorities.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for an income specialist, someone that is going to generate income the right way, check out our website, retirementincomesource.com. We have a map there where you can find an income specialist in your area.
And most important, we hope that you're here with us next week, same time, same station. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and you've been listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.